Thanks so much, Debbie. That was a really nice introduction. And I want to say a big thank you to Debbie, again, Debbie Cross here at Antigone Books, and Trudy Mills at Antigone, and you all have been such great supporters of my work and the literary community. It's really nice. And also thank you to C-SPAN and Peter Slen for continuing to support my work as well. I love BookTV. And in the program I teach in at UC Riverside in Palm Desert, I recommend highly to my students that they watch BookTV every weekend. Also, I'd like to thank all of you for coming out tonight. It means a lot to me, and it's a beautiful evening, a full moon evening, and it's hot out, not unlike the weather that was in play on when the incident I write about in my new book, Desert Reckoning, took place. I want to tell you a bit about how and why I came to write this book. It was August 2nd, 2003, and as some of you know, I break for sand. The Mojave is my longtime beat, and I was visiting the photographer Mark LaMonica up at his home in the Antelope Valley, which is the northern half of LA County, kind of its shadow side. It's like the kooky cousin who lives in the attic that nobody likes to talk about, but it really is like the other half of Los Angeles, fully one half, and it's mostly desert. And we were visiting, Mark and I, and I was in the middle of finishing up my previous book, Mustang, and also we were working on another project about the Antelope Valley, and suddenly it was high noon, as I said, and literally it was baking, and suddenly we heard all these sirens screeching into the desert, and not like one or two or five, but dozens and dozens and dozens, and even for that area where you hear everything, because sound travels, very great distances in the desert, and there are a lot of police calls up there, domestic violence and so on, and it can be a very violent place and also a peaceful place. So we decided to turn on the TV and find out what all the ruckus was about, and it turned out that there was that a beloved local sheriff named Deputy Stephen Sorenson had been ambushed at a trailer in a remote little burg called Llano, which was near Lancaster in the city where I was visiting Mark. And it was quite a violent incident according to the early reports. And by then, and this was just like an hour or two after we had heard the first sirens, there were choppers flying out, and 6 or 7 different police agencies were converging on the scene, and it was this huge and rapidly escalating manhunt. And Mark turned to me and said, "Hey, it sounds like your kind of story." And he was sort of half joking, but when Joshua trees are involved, I'm usually right there. And I don't, even though I do break for sand, and much of my work is set in the Mojave, and the desert is often a main character, I don't respond to like every siren I hear. I don't do where's the fire kind of reporting, even though this story, Desert Reckoning, ends in a giant conflagration. Ironically enough, as I say, don't do where's the fire reporting, but I guess I just have with this book, which took 8 years, by the way. At any rate, we started watching the coverage as it unfolded that afternoon, and it turned out that the two main characters involved were very compelling to me. There was this dedicated hermit, Donald Kueck, who was a suspect in this shooting, and he had fled after ambushing the sheriff, and it turned out that he was a Dr. Dolittle figure with an assault rifle, and his best friends were animals, and he had lived out there for years, and eked out a living off the land. And as I said, Deputy Stephen Sorenson was a beloved sheriff in the area. He had been, that had been his beat for some time, and he was kind of an Andy of Mayberry figure who was available 24/7. Everybody in the desert, in that part of the desert, had his cell phone number, and if you had a need, you could call him. And so here was this very brutal shootout in the other half of LA County, frontier Los Angeles. This is an hour away from the studios and the beaches, but it's really like Tombstone territory, and I don't mean like now, but in the 19th century. And in fact, LA County was the most violent of frontier outposts, more violent than Tombstone or Deadwood. At the time the country was roiling and coming into its own. So at that point, when it was a few hours into the manhunt, and I decided maybe it was something I wanted to look into. And of course, as I said, the desert was involved, and Joshua trees, and then I also respond to elements of the sacred if they're in a story, and I sort of had a vibe that they might be. There was this Old Testament scenery, but I mean something much more than that. There were these two people who seemed to have some sort of longing that drew them together, longing for a connection. As I found out the deeper I got into this story, they both had very interesting backstories, which I recount in my book. So I called my editors at Rolling Stone, whom I had worked with in the past on other stories, and asked them if they wanted me to cover this manhunt, and they did. And this siege went on for 7 days. Donald Kueck knew the desert so well that he was able to outfox this massive high-tech posse, as I said, the biggest manhunt in modern California history, which by day 2 or 3 involved the FBI, the DEA, Edwards Air Force Base, thousands of cops, and I'm not exaggerating, on foot, on horseback, mounted posses, civilian vigilantes. People were all over it. A cop killing always attracts a lot of attention, but this was very brutal. And it had all these Wild West frontier elements, and it's not typical that one man is able to outfox, this kind of a posse these days. So that's what was going on as I got into the early days of the manhunt for Rolling Stone. And then after I finished my piece, which took 2 years to write, then I realized that the story needed to be a book, and so here we are. So I want to tell you a little bit we'll read some excerpts from it and then talk a bit about it as I go through, and then answer your questions. This is from the prologue, A Strange Request. Alone in his small trailer, Donald Charles Kueck had been singing a song. It wasn't a pretty song, nor was it a song that the casual passerby would hear on the off chance that he or she was in the vicinity of the remote little abode. No, the weird and discordant tune emanating from the trailer, always calling for someone to come and put him out of his misery, was broadcast on a frequency few could monitor, its sound waves fading in and out of the radio dead zones that pockmarked the vast desert expanse. But the singer was persistent and unwavering, and his song encircled the sage and drifted across the nest of the last desert tortoise. It traveled down washes cut by ancient floods and caressed the tough backs of scorpions, and one day it crossed a bajada, and the singer, yearning for his days to end, sang more furiously, sending the dirge into the higher elevations, up a butte studded with Joshua trees and granite slabs and bobcats, and up higher until it was swept away by a Santa Ana wind, that high-voltage swirl of hot air that is born in the Mojave and is said to carry messages of evil. And it wafted across the high desert scrub, over mountains and sea, and was heard by sensitive souls in other lands, far-flung sisters of the man who sang his own death song. And they called each other from Okinawa and Pensacola and Arizona and knew something was wrong. In another desert community outside of Los Angeles, there was a daughter who also sensed impending doom, and she wrung her hands as she knew the end was near. Animals with their keener hearing responded to the softer notes of the singer's grim melody, for all living things respond to music, and would come in from points south, east, north, and west of the trailer to be fed and nourished by the man who loved them but hated cops. In the mornings, the jackrabbits were the first to arrive, arranging themselves around a special outdoor breakfast table with portions of food placed at individual settings.